live feed on Sheldon's YouTube channel. Let's get to it. It's gonna be a very different kind of live feed. It's gonna be about the history of alternative hip hop. Alternative hip hop. Because that was something that was an interesting genre at the time. Art still exists today. Back then, there was a lot of alternative hip hop that was different from the mainstream, trying to stay away from the gangster rap that was going on at the time, the late 80s, early 90s, and so forth and so on. So this is a subgenre that was defined by artists who rejected the genre's traditional stereotypes that's popularized by old school hip hop and gangster rap. And you go back to the mid to late 80s, the style was spearheaded by the Native Tongues Collective on the East Coast. When you enter the click on this video, you will see cover of 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul. Rest in peace. The True Boy, Pastor still alive, and Maceo was still alive, and one of the members passed a few years back. True Boy. They were the ones that led this alternative hip hop movement from the Native Tongues Collective. The Jungle Brothers, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest. And then you had outside of that, X-Clan, Brand Nubian, Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Moni Love, Queen Latifah, later Busta Rhymes and Most Def. So these artists were emphasized on being positive-minded, good-natured with Afrocentric lyrics, pioneering and popularizing the use of eclectic sampling, jazz-influenced beats, and hip-hop, drawing influences from political, progressive, conscious hip-hop artists such as Grandmaster Flash and Public Enemy. So that's how things, turned about. Why you had alternative hip-hop for a reason, because it doesn't have a balance of what was going on at the time. Backpack rap, so I call it that, backpack rap. We call it, alternative rap. We call it anything, but it's all started in the mid to late 80s for its alternative hip hop. I'm saying that's where it started from. So during the 90s, you also had the alternative hip hop movement that expanded to the West Coast, with groups like the Far Side, Digital Underground, Souls of Mischief, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, Jurassic 5, Styles Beyond, Freestyle Fellowship. And you go to the South, you got Arrested Development, Goody Mob, Kogi Brothers, Coffee Brothers, and Outkast. So the commercial and cultural moment of the movement was impeded by the rise of popularity of the West Coast gangster rap. That was the elephant in the room, so it had to be some alternative, do something different than the gangster rap that was going on at the time. And then you had the Fugees, the De La Souls, the Tribe Called Quest, Outkast, Arrested Development. So the Native Tongues movement inspired other groups to do the same thing, follow that aesthetic, that blueprint, like the Roots, Lupe Fiasco, Difficult Fans, Common, Little Brother, Black Eyed Peas, Dead Prez, Camp Lo, Jean Grey, Nappy Roots, Black Star, Jay Dilla, Lauryn Hill, MF Doom, Pharrell Williams, Kanye West, and Pusha T. And then you look at the 2010s, alternative hip hop reattained its place within the mainstream to the backpack rap movement, which included the crossover success of artists such as Kanye West. Others included Hieroglyphics, Atmosphere, Echelon, Delay Peoples, and The Alchemist, Our Future, Brockhampton, merged out of the movement. Alternative hip hop evolved to encompass several trap-based internet rap genres. So that's what it's all about. You want to talk about the characteristics of this genre. You gotta look at during the rise of the hip hop 80s, early 90s, the popular hardcore hip hop, gangster rap led to themes of gangsterism, consumerism, club culture that became defining stereotypes of mainstream hip hop, with negative stereotypes being related to homophobia, violence, and sexism. Alternative hip hop emerged, largely to subvert, satirize, or challenge these conventions, utilizing unconventional musical techniques, production, sampling not commonly found in music mainstream hip hop at the time. Artists often incorporate socially conscious, intellectual, introspective lyricism, avoiding profanity, displaying rap stereotypes on topics such as sexuality through androgynous fashion and styles. Though early artists associated with the movement, such as a Tribe Called Quest, will also perpetuate some of these traditional stereotypes with their song Georgia Porgy being directed by being too homophobic. With some groups achieve commercial success, other rap acts, most of them tend to be embraced always by alternative rock listeners and indie music fans rather than hip hop or pop audiences. So I'm saying so in 2000, 2010s, the stereotypes popularized by West Coast gangster rap in the 90s have become dominant in mainstream hip hop, prompting discussions about the genre's portrayal of violence, sex, sexism, and drugs. And then, no, the perpetuated negative representation of African American culture. So artists emerging through the internet rap movement continue to carry the legacy of alternative hip hop. Thanks for the 19 people that are looking and watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the like button. So look at the history of alternative hip hop. When you look at going back to the 80s and 90s origins of it, hip hop originally emerged from New York's underground music scene during the late early 70s. By the end of the decade, the genre began to gain wider mainstream attention through the promise of disco rap, which prompted artists to explore more experimental approaches to their work. So in 1983, Ramsey K. Rock released the single Beat Bop. It was produced and arranged by Jean Michael Basquiat. Though it remained largely underground, the track was later described as a blueprint for the apocalyptic, witty, and experimental style of later alternative hip hop art. So you could say everything started with this song, Beat Bop by K. Rob and Ramsey. That's something that was different. That was something that laid down the blueprint. Then you get to the late 80s, in the midst of the golden age of hip hop, alternative hip hop was headed primarily by the negative tones. That's why you look at the thumbnail, you see the picture of De La Soul's album cover, Fifi High and Rising, that came out in '89, because they were the ones that led it even more further for as alternative hip hop, the Native Tongues movement. Jungle Brothers, De La Soul, The Tribe Called Quest, Money Love, S Clan, Queen Latifah, and Busta Rhymes and Most Def later on. Then drawing influence from conscious and progressive rap, artists like Grandmaster Flash, you had Pete Rock and CL Smooth, Brand Nubian, as well as from the radical militant political hip hop group Public Enemy. Then on the West Coast, you had artists like the Far Side, the Underground, Soul's Mischief, Delta Funky with Sapien, Jurassic 5, Styles Beyond, and Freestyle Fellowship, as well as Southern acts like Arrested Development, Goody Mob, and Outkast. So, similar to the alternative rock movement and alternative hip hop, seeking to the mainstream at the dawn of the 90s. And then you had Arrested Development, you had the Fugees stand out as some of the first few alternative rap to be recognized by mainstream audiences. Now, there were some albums that would definitely represent alternative hip hop to the highest degree, like 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul. This is the album that definitely represented alternative hip hop. That's what it was. It definitely represented. This album came out February 6, 1989. Songs like Platoon, Potholes in My Lawn, Buddy, Me, Myself, and I, Say No Go, I Know, The Magic Number, Tread Water. This is definitely unique style of alternative hip hop, because despite what was going on in the late 80s with the gangster rap, you had the hardcore confrontational violence lyrics. 3 Feet High Rising didn't go with the norm. They stood out from this trend by showcasing a more positive style of De La Soul. They were labeled hippies and all that, but still they was alternative. They were different. They had their own style, their own lane. They were different. This album was known for its quiz show. Then you see the skits. They invent the skit. You make the case. They invent the hip hop skit. Start with them. The style. This album is one of the unique, influential albums of all time. Speak for how to write. They invented the hip hop skit. That's alternative as well. Yeah, they wanted to go in a different direction, and they definitely represented alternative hip hop, the highest order. They definitely did. Yeah, rest in peace of True Boy passed away, unfortunately. Um, it's an unfortunate thing, but it is what it is. I just want to talk about that. Let's get this thing started, keep it going. He passed away 3 years ago, like 54 years old, man, very young. All right, then you had, people think the Travels and Paths of Rhythm. That was the Tribe Called Quest's first album. They were following that wave of alternative hip hop, you know, and what they were doing. Left by Why and El Segundo, Need Up a Bum, Can I Kick It? Very alternative hip hop. So you talk about this album, one of the greatest albums of the 90s. It was a central album in alternative hip hop with its unconventional production and lyricism. Very influential. Classic album, definitely. How they did things with that album. The thing about the particular things of Travels in the Paths of Rhythm, even though a Tribe Called Quest member Ali Shaheed Muhammad fully elaborated that Elder Cool J, Big Daddy Kane, Karis One, NWA, Public Enemy had a tough guy image. It was this bravado at the time that all the hip hop artists had. But people think the Travels wasn't any of that. We weren't trying to be tough guys. See, that's the thing. Alternative. They wasn't trying to be a tough guy. They were poetic. They were witty. They were lighthearted. They was having fun, just being good with one another. So they would come with their own skin. So they were able to do their own thing, unique way, an alternative way. And then you have these are routes to the far side. That's the far side. That on the West Coast, they represent alternative hip hop as well in 1992. With Pass Me By. That's the signature record, make a case. So despite the dominant era of the gangster rap that's going on the West Coast, these guys from the West Coast and they making stuff that's alternative, different on the West Coast and from South Central Los Angeles, and they started to go that alternative route. Obviously, they was following behind what the Native Tongues was doing on the East Coast. They was able to have success with it. So that's the thing about it. The influence. They were influenced by a Tribe Called Quest. It wasn't following what the G Funk sound was doing. They were doing something different. It was all ride to the far side. So they achieved minor commercial success as they garnered immense acclaim from music critics, described the records as ambitiously innovative but playful masterpieces, hailing artists as the future of hip hop music as a video, as a whole. Excuse me, as a whole. Yeah, so yeah, that's how it was at the time. And continuing into the late 90s and 2000s. Now things changed obviously with the gangster rap, with Snoop Dogg, Warren G, and NWA, shout out Compton, The Chronic, Doggy Style. They redefined the direction of hip hop and resulted in lyricism concerning the gangster lifestyle becoming the driving force. So the situation changed around the mid 90s with the emergence of mainstream popularity, East Coast hardcore rap artists like Wu-Tang Clan, Nas, Notorious B.I.G., and Mobb Deep. So following this development, many alternative rap acts eventually either disbanded or faded into obscurity. So that's the thing about it. A commercial breakthrough came about in the late 90s, though, that rejuvenated interest in indie music by the general public due to the mainstream success of the Fugees and Arrested Development. Acts like Slum Village, Common, and Roots were rising to prominence. And then you look at the Fugees, there's another group that had a lot of success. Very, very alternative. The Score, which came out in 96. That was released in February 1996. At that time, came released softly at Fuji Live, Ready or Not, No Woman, No Cry. The album peaked at number one and became briefly the best selling hip hop album of all time. And then the same year in 96, the Tribe Called Quest reached their commercial peak with their release of Beats, Rhymes, and Life, which reached number one on the US Billboard 200 chart. It became the best selling release. Acts like Outkast and De La Soul released out 18 aliens and Stakes is High. So since the mid 90s, you had independent record labels like Raucous Records, Rhyme Sayers Entertainment, Intercom, Stones Throw, Definitive Jux, QN5. We got alternative rock acts like, Cunning Linguist, Justified, Little Brother, Talib Kweli, MF Doom, Atmosphere, Most Def, Forever March, artists like that. And then in 2000, it retained its place in the mainstream due in parts to the declining commercial viability of gangster rap with Gnarls Barkley and Kanye West and Outkast. Outkast made a fifth album called Speaker Box, Love Below. And MF Doom with the stuff that he was doing with Operation Doomsday, 1999. So these are the examples of alternative hip hop, the historical aspect, far as that is concerned. The Lupe Fiasco, Kids in the Hall, Kanye really brought back that backpack rap again, the alternative way of doing things, like the groups that came before him. So that's the thing that stands out for us. The legacy of this group, of the alternative hip hop movement, is definitely very influential. Definitely had its mark on the music, experimenting on things. We had experimental hip hop, you know, not copying what is relevant, but something that's different, underground, uncommercial. I'm surprised Gangsta is not including this, because Gangsta, I think they definitely represent alternative hip hop. Their underground sound and their heyday, backpack rap and stuff like that. So that's it for that, man. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for liking the video. 2 people that like the video. I'll be back at 7 o'clock with another live feed. Appreciate the time. This is about the history of alternative hip hop, the origins, the beginnings, and who were included in this genre of alternative hip hop and how impactful it was. So that's it. Talk to you at 7 o'clock. Talk to you soon.